In this video, I'm going to show you how to freeze dry diced tomatoes. I have a major bumper crop of tomatoes this year, and freeze drying them in diced peeled form will be such a time saver later on. So we start with ripe tomatoes, and then we're going to boil them briefly to help loosen the skins, and then ice them in ice water, and then I have a towel for laying them out to dry. And then I have my chopper. I use a strawberry huller to core the tomatoes and a serrated knife for slicing them before they go in the chopper. And then a bucket to collect skins and cores and all the unusable parts. And here is what that process looks like. This is actually my cheese ladle that works so great for blanching tomatoes and peaches and things like that. So you can decide how many tomatoes makes a good batch or load for you. We typically did about, 10. This is more than 10 pictured here, but when my youngest son helps me with this job, he typically does about 10 to 12 tomatoes at a time. And then you boil the tomatoes for about 30 seconds. 30 seconds in the boiling water, and then you want to get an ice bath ready. I like to keep bagged ice on hand for this because my refrigerator ice does not produce nearly fast enough for this purpose. My refrigerator ice also is not enough ice if I'm doing large quantities of blanching and icing. As soon as the 30 seconds is up, then you want to transfer the tomatoes immediately to the ice bath. You don't want to cook the tomatoes because then they're going to get really mushy and hard to work with. And then you'll cool the tomatoes in the ice bath for as long as they take to become cool to the touch. And then you can see that I've got that towel. I usually lay the tomatoes on the towel to dry. And then my strawberry huller works fantastically for removing the core of the tomatoes. So I tend to work in batches. I do all of the coring and lay all of the tomatoes wherever, like on the towel or on the cutting board. And then after all the tomatoes are cored, the cores are removed, then I slip the skins off. Sometimes I make a pile like you can see here on the cutting board, or sometimes I put each skin directly into the bucket. It's probably faster to just make a pile on the cutting board and then all at once move that whole pile of skins into the bucket, but whatever works best for you. I am so impressed with this new chopper. I have gone through so many of the plastic versions, and while this one does have a plastic tray underneath, it has really sturdy metal feet that take the brunt of the chopping force. That was always the problem before with my plastic choppers. The brunt of the force went into the plastic reservoir beneath the chopper, and over time it inevitably broke. I went through so many of them, and I am so excited to have this new, much sturdier chopper. For chopping tomatoes, it does work best to chop a half of a tomato, so that's why I have my serrated knife. I slice the tomatoes in half, and then you place the cut side down on the blades, and they chop very efficiently that way. And then I empty the reservoir underneath into my freeze dryer trays until I have 5 full trays. That's a full freeze dryer load. And if the tomatoes are raw, then first they'll freeze in the freeze dryer, and then the moisture will be removed. You can also freeze the trays in a freezer before loading them into the freeze dryer, and this will cut down on the time needed for the freeze drying process because they will already be frozen. Then you'll just dry until they are dry and crispy. Make sure that the tomatoes in the trays are not cold. They need to be warm or room temperature. And then you simply transfer them to your storage container. I like to use glass jars so I can see what's inside. Glass jars are also less wasteful because I can use them over and over again. And they obviously do not contain any plastic, so no plastic is getting onto my food. But of course, another option is to use Mylar bags. Another point to mention is that if you're going to be storing tomatoes or any food for a long period of time, you may want to add oxygen absorbers, or you may want to try sealing the jars with a vacuum sealer to remove the air. I don't plan to store these long term. I plan to use them up within months to a year. And so I am experimenting with not using oxygen absorbers. Frankly, I feel like oxygen absorbers are really cumbersome, a little bit complicated to work with. It could just be that I'm still a little new to freeze drying, and I reserve the right to change my mind. But for now, I have been packaging almost all of my freeze-dried foods without oxygen absorbers, and we have been eating them, and they're holding up just fine. And then, of course, it's always a good idea to label your jars with the contents and the date. And these freeze-dried tomatoes can be added directly to soups, other dishes. They will absorb some liquid, so depending on what you are cooking, you may need to add a little extra liquid to make up for that. And you can also reconstitute them, rehydrate them by adding a little bit of hot water. Always start with just a little bit at a time because you can always add more, but you cannot add less. You can even add these right to an omelet or to a salad. Think about that, having fresh, homegrown tomato taste on your green salad in the middle of winter. And that is how to freeze dry diced tomatoes.